Dan Morgan looks like your average suburban dad. He sells used cars, packs school lunches, and never misses a wedding anniversary. Tonight, he's at a theme park with his wife Jessica, celebrating 18 years of marriage. Jessica has always dreamed of a proper family holiday, but Dan figures rides in the theme park is close enough. That is, until a group of teenagers start mocking him and dump a drink on his head. They laugh, thinking he's just some harmless guy in dad jeans. What they don't know is that Dan could break every bone in their bodies without breaking a sweat. But instead of unleashing the beast inside, Dan wipes his face, smiles, and walks away. He's not that man anymore, or so he hopes. This is the family plan. In Buffalo, New York, Dan Morgan is a top used car salesman. At work, he's asked to join a company photo, but Dan skips it and heads home instead. At home, Dan sticks to a strict routine. He greets his wife Jessica and their 3 kids, Nina, Kyle, and Max. However, Jessica and Nina are arguing loudly. Nina, who originally planned to study journalism at Stanford, now wants to switch to Southern Iowa University just to follow her boyfriend, Trevor. Jessica looks to Dan for support, but Nina refuses to change her mind. That night, Dan asks Kyle to babysit Max, but Kyle bails, saying he has a group project. He passes the job to Nina, who complains but agrees. Meanwhile, Kyle meets up with his friend Samir and secretly pays him so he can sneak into the garage and play video games without interruptions. What the family doesn't know is that Kyle is actually a famous online gamer named Killboy, with tons of fans watching him. The next morning, Jessica tries to relieve stress with a tough boxing workout. During the session, she accidentally punches another woman named Gwen.
Oh my God!
They talk it out, and Jessica opens up about how frustrated she feels because Dan never plans fun activities and family time is almost non-existent. Gwen, a travel guide, gives Jessica her business card and says if she ever wants a break, to give her a call. Meanwhile, at the supermarket, Dan is shopping with Max when a stranger suddenly attacks him. Dan reacts instantly. With quick reflexes and calm skill, he takes the man down in seconds, shocking everyone nearby.
Really?
He then pays for his groceries and walks out like it's just another normal day. At home, Dan opens a hidden drawer beneath the stairs and finds a stash of real weapons. Quietly, he calls his old friend Augie and asks for new identities for his entire family. Later, Dan puts Max in the car and drives to Nina's school. He checks the magazine room, where she's supposed to be, but it's empty. After slipping some cash to a student, he learns Nina quit months ago. The student points him toward the stadium where Nina is hanging out with her friends. Dan finds her visibly angry. Nina snaps back, saying he never even read her work. Dan doesn't argue. He simply tells her to come with him. Next, Dan goes to find Kyle. He's supposed to be at chess club, but instead, Dan discovers him gaming in Samir's garage. Furious, Dan pulls him out and orders him into the car. With all 3 kids loaded, Dan picks up Jessica at the hospital and heads straight for Vegas. Suddenly, Jessica's dream vacation feels within reach. But unexpectedly, a black van starts following them. Dan notices it but stays calm. Without alerting his family, he pulls into his dealership's garage. There, he finds a tracker under the car. He moves it onto a test vehicle and asks a coworker to take it for a high-speed spin. The van follows, chasing the wrong car. Now safe, Dan gets back on the road to Vegas. When Jessica tries to post vacation pictures online, Dan grabs everyone's phones and tosses them off a bridge. He says it's for a digital detox, but the real reason is he doesn't want anyone tracking them. Later that day, the family stops at the American Vehicle Association office. Dan refuses to use a credit card, which makes the clerk suspicious. But after sliding some cash across the counter, Dan gets a stack of old-fashioned road maps. Back on the road, everyone stares at their empty hands, missing their phones. Slowly, the kids start singing, Jessica joins in, and for the first time in a while, they laugh like a real family again. Meanwhile, back at their house, a man named McCaffrey is hunting for Dan. He and his team track Dan's every move, but without credit card use or social media updates, they're stuck. Still, McCaffrey believes Dan hasn't told his family the whole truth, and that gives him hope. Back with Dan, he pulls into a hotel parking lot, ready to check in. But then he spots Kyle taking a photo with a fan. The fan posts it online immediately. Dan knows one photo like that could ruin their cover, so he changes plans. No hotel tonight, that they'll sleep in the car instead. Later that night, McCaffrey's men begin tailing them. Dan spots them in the rearview mirror. To keep his family calm, he turns up the music. Max giggles happily in the back seat, completely unaware of the danger closing in. Suddenly, one biker pulls out a gun, but Dan reacts fast, shooting first and knocking him off the road. Another thug grabs onto the car, but Dan jams Max's milk bottle into the guy's helmet, causing him to crash. The last biker collides with a billboard after Dan rams his car into the bike. Jessica wakes up from the commotion, but Dan just shrugs it off, saying they hit a pothole. After a long, restless drive, Dan finally pulls over to rest in a quiet field. Just then, Nina wakes up and realizes they've crossed into Iowa. She begs Dan to take her to Southern Iowa University. Jessica and Nina argue again, but Dan gives in and drives her to campus. As they stroll around the university, Kyle quietly tells Nina that no one actually hates her boyfriend Trevor. What bothers people is how much she's changed. He confesses he misses the old Nina. His words strike a chord, and Nina smiles, touched that her little brother is finally opening up. Meanwhile, on the road, Jessica opens up to Dan about her past. She was once a promising pole vaulter, but a leg injury ended her dreams. Dan thinks about sharing his own secrets, but suddenly notices a man nearby, acting suspiciously with a suitcase. The man claims to be a German corn seed salesman visiting his daughter at the university. To test him, Dan switches effortlessly to fluent German. Jessica is shocked. She never knew Dan spoke another language. Feeling uneasy, she quietly walks away. The man then opens his suitcase, revealing genuine corn seeds, proving his story is true. Out of nowhere, one of McCaffrey's men appears and opens fire. Dan reacts instantly, ducking into a nearby lab where a fierce fight breaks out. After a tense struggle, Dan defeats the attacker and walks away unharmed. Meanwhile, Nina visits the dorms and stops by Trevor's room, only to find him with another girl. Hurt and furious, she confronts him, teaches him a lesson he won't forget, and decides to leave his life behind for good. Later, the family hits the road again, heading toward Las Vegas. Passing through Colorado, Nina offers to drive, while Dan takes a rest. With everyone asleep in the back seat, she quietly apologizes for quitting the school magazine and promises to earn back her editor spot. She also thanks Dan for keeping her secret from Jessica. The next morning, after spending the night in Colorado, Dan calls Augie and arranges a meeting in Vegas to get new passports. While eating at a local diner, Dan nervously rehearses how to tell Jessica everything, but when the moment comes, he changes the subject. Kyle admits he feels more confident as Killboy, his gaming persona, than in real life. He explains gaming makes him feel smart and respected, something school doesn't offer. Then he challenges Dan to a deal, a game of laser tag. If Kyle wins, Dan must stop criticizing his gaming. If Dan wins, Kyle will quit gaming for good. Dan agrees, and they head to a laser tag arena across the street. What Kyle doesn't realize is that Dan has years of tactical training. The game ends quickly, with Dan dominating the match. Kyle feels crushed, but Dan comforts him with a warm hug, sharing a tender moment as a caring father. When they arrive in Las Vegas, Dan checks his family into a hotel using a reservation he made earlier. Then, he quietly slips away to meet Augie at a nearby bar. There, Augie hands over new passports and flight tickets to Vancouver. With their escape plan in place, Dan returns to the hotel to get ready for a nice dinner with Jessica. Just in case things go south, he secretly packs a few weapons. Before leaving, he warns the kids to stay inside and not open the door for anyone. But, as expected, the kids don't listen. Kyle and Nina sneak out with Max and head straight to the hotel's gaming zone. Meanwhile, one of McCaffrey's men spots the Morgans in Vegas and quickly alerts his boss. The hunt is back on. Down in the gaming area, Kyle meets a pro gamer named Run, who introduces him to some other players. Rin takes a special interest in Nina, so to get closer to her, he asks Kyle to play an upcoming online match on his behalf. At the restaurant, Dan tries to open up about his past. When a waiter speaks French, Dan instinctively replies in flawless French. He starts sharing his life story in a language Jessica doesn't understand. She just smiles, thinking he's being charming, and compliments his impressive French. Back in the gaming zone, Kyle prepares for the online match, unaware that one of McCaffrey's men is watching from distance. Later that night, Dan and Jessica return to their room after dinner, only to walk right into an ambush. Armed men burst in. Dan quickly takes down 2 attackers, but Coogan grabs Jessica at gunpoint.
Dan?
Dan lowers his weapon, pretending to surrender. When a second Coogan lets his guard down, Dan suddenly pulls out a knife and throws it straight into his eye. Jessica breaks free. Panicked, Jessica rushes to the kids' room, only to find it empty. Furious, she storms down to the gaming zone and finds them there. She confronts Dan in front of everyone, demanding the truth and saying she can't even bear to look at him. As the tension rises, Kyle finishes the match and is named MVP. But the celebration is short-lived. Jessica and Dan quickly gather the kids and rush to a safer place. There, Dan finally reveals the truth that he used to be a covert assassin who left the organization to live a normal life. Since then, McCaffrey's crew has been hunting him. Kyle and Nina laugh it off, thinking their dad is joking until gunfire erupts. Dan springs into action, protecting his family as he leads them into a nearby casino. Inside, he confronts the shooter, but his bullets don't faze her because she's wearing body armor. Thinking on his feet, Dan creates a distraction, outsmarts her, and takes her down. After escaping the casino shootout, Dan finally reveals that his real name is Sam, and he once served in a secret military unit. Years ago, McCaffrey hired him to eliminate criminals beyond the reach of the law. But when Sam discovered that McCaffrey was merely profiting from those killings, he walked away. That betrayal is why McCaffrey has been hunting him ever since. Dan hands out new passports and plane tickets to his family. However, Kyle and Nina don't feel safe. They're furious and blame him for turning their lives upside down. Jessica feels the deepest sting of betrayal. After 18 years of marriage built on lies, she's reached her breaking point. Without a word, she contacts Gwen and books a vacation just for herself and the kids. Later, Jessica and the children meet Gwen at a private airstrip. To their surprise, Gwen has arranged a sleek private jet for the trip. During the flight, Gwen starts talking about an old boyfriend from Buffalo. As she shares more details, Jessica begins to realize the man Gwen's describing might actually be Dan. When the plane touches down, McCaffrey is waiting on the tarmac. When it set them up, she wanted Dan back, and using his family as bait was her way to lure him in. McCaffrey captures Jessica and the kids, threatening Dan over the phone and demanding he come to the casino or watch his family be killed. Inside the casino, McCaffrey's men track Dan's every move using a drone. Dan is escorted by a man named Spiros, who leads him straight to the room where his family is held. There, McCaffrey reveals he's not just an old partner, but Dan's biological father. He says he felt betrayed when Dan left the life he built for him. Now, he wants Dan back as his top assassin, but Dan refuses. Enraged, McCaffrey orders Gwen to kill Jessica. To buy time, Dan agrees to cooperate, but only if Jessica and the kids are safely returned to Buffalo. McCaffrey reluctantly agrees. As Spiros leads them toward the exit, Jessica springs into action. She rips off Max's diaper and slaps it onto Spiros' face, then shoves him off the upper floor. Jessica and the kids rush through the casino to find Dan. Meanwhile, Gwen tries to seduce Dan into staying, but he knocks her out and escapes just in time.
18 years of deception thing.
Both.
With the alarm raised, McCaffrey orders his men to lock down the building. Dan tells Jessica and the kids to make their way to the rooftop. He hands Kyle the drone controls, so Kyle can guide his father by tracking the enemy's movements from above. Back at the casino, McCaffrey's men lie in wait by the elevator, ready to trap Dan and his family. But when the doors slide open, all they find is Max's diaper bag. As they lean in to inspect it, a hidden bomb detonates, taking them out in an instant. Meanwhile, Dan moves swiftly, taking down McCaffrey's men one by one, guided by Kyle's drone surveillance. However, the tide shifts when Gwen regains consciousness. McCaffrey wastes no time calling her, ordering her to track down Kyle and stop him before he derails their entire plan. On another floor, Dan spots McCaffrey from above and aims his gun, demanding he end this madness once and for all. Instead of surrendering, McCaffrey commands his men to open fire, forcing Dan to dive for cover. Up on the rooftop, Jessica tells the kids to hide just as Gwen appears, sparking a fierce confrontation. Meanwhile, below, McCaffrey shoots down the drone, cutting off Dan's only way to monitor the chaos. Back on the roof, Gwen lunges at the kids, but Jessica tries to intervene. She attempts a daring pole vault to a higher level using a bamboo stick. Mid-jump, the stick snaps, and Jessica crashes hard.
Oh, here we go again.
Gwen laughs, assuming the fight is over. But Jessica quickly grabs the broken bamboo and hurls it like a spear, striking Gwen dead on the spot. At the same time, Dan and McCaffrey finally come face to face. Just as McCaffrey raises his gun to fire, Nina arrives with the rest of the family, shouting "Grandpa" and begging him to stop. That brief hesitation is all Dan needs. He tackles McCaffrey and knocks him out cold. It turns out Nina called out intentionally, giving Dan the perfect opening strike. In the final scene, McCaffrey is locked away for good. Nina has grown into a respected news reporter. Dan runs a successful security consulting firm, helping banks protect their assets. Jessica finally pursues her passion, working as an athletic coach at a local school. Now, the entire family spends their weekends traveling together, bound by one simple rule: no phones allowed. And for once, nobody minds that they're too busy enjoying the journey. So the moral of the story is, if your dad's a secretly jacked ex-assassin with spy skills, just let him plan the family vacation.